So let's straight away get into the next panel, from data governance to advanced manufacturing, preparing for India's centennial digital economy. I'm delighted to call on our moderator, the Managing Director for Apple India, Virat Bhatia. He's going to be moderating this panel. And I would like to also welcome our esteemed panelists, the Honorable Minister of State for Electronics and Information Technology, Mr. Rajiv Chandrasekhar, Country Head for Intel India and Vice President for Intel Foundry Services, Nivruti Rai, and the President of Western Digital, Shiva Shivaram. May I request the moderator and the panelists to please come up on stage? Can I have a round of applause for them? So the panel discussion is from data governance to advanced manufacturing, preparing for India's centennial digital economy. The moderator, Virat Bhatia, Managing Director for Apple India. Our panelists, Honorable Minister of State for Electronics and Information Technology, Shri Rajiv Chandrasekhar, Country Head for Intel India and Vice President for Intel Foundry Services, Nivruti Rai, and President of Western Digital, Shiva Shivaram. I request all of you to please come up on stage. Let's start the panel discussion. Can I have a round of applause once again, welcoming our moderator and our discussants on stage. I hand over the panel discussion to Virat Bhatia, the moderator. Thank you.
Wow. Honourable Minister, my distinguished panelists, Nivruti, this is a really important session for a meeting where I know a lot of people are staying back. They want to specifically hear things that are going on in this sector. The Honourable Minister and I spoke very briefly before the session, and I said, would you like to have some opening comments? Would you like to have some remarks? He said, no, just jump right in. We'll start off with the discussions. I think everybody knows everybody here. It's a sort of close-knit group. Just by way of introduction, the one thing that I want to say about the Honourable Minister is that I have, noticing this, and most of you would have, there are very few people who tend to reinvent themselves that much in lives. And here is an example of a person who's reinvented himself at least thrice, maybe more. That's the notice I have. He started it as a professional after his studies in the US, worked in Intel. We know about that sort of background. After which in 1992, 30 years from today, he founded BPL Mobile, which became one of the largest network providers in India, service providers in the mobile business. He ran that business till 2006, after which he reinvented himself again to become a full-time politician, was in the Rajya Sabha for a long period of time as an independent member, and then from the BJP. And then exactly 14 months ago, to the day, he was appointed the minister for two really important ministries. And sort of keeping a tab on all the dates so that we make sure that we get that piece right. So I'm going to start with asking the Honourable Minister, who spent 30 years starting, I'm guessing in a room with some network engineers, first preparing the bid for Mumbai, followed by Tamil Nadu, Maharashtra, and I want to say Kerala, and also planning the network architecture for the city of Mumbai, which is fairly complex, where cell site was not a word that was known to the world in 1992. So starting there, and today being at the helm of deciding policies that will mold the future of India in terms of the focus that the Honorable Prime Minister has laid down for all of us, which is technology and trade, at least the two T's. Before we go into the future, sir, how would you see your journey? How have you seen the changes? What have we done right? What we could have done? Just a brief, because that will really set the perspective for what the discussion today has to be. 30 years starting.
You want me to do this in 2 minutes?
In 2 minutes.
Okay, sorry. Look, so first of all, I think when I stepped into entrepreneurship and telecom and technology in 1992, 30 years ago, as you repeatedly pointed out, and I'm trying to pretend that I'm a young minister and all of that, so that gets exposed straight away with that. But look, I think it tells you the distance that India has traveled, where the starting points were, and where we are today. I mean, I use this as an example all the time when I meet with students and technology entrepreneurs to say that when we first built our wireless networks in India, except for probably the screwdriver, the screws included, everything was imported.
Correct.
So, we've obviously traveled a big distance today when we are launching 5G, where there are tremendous pieces, large amounts of innovations that have been built into these future networks that are designed in India, many components and products and devices that have been made in India. So I think that is, in my opinion, the nutshell of the journey that India has traveled. To me personally, look, 30 years ago, I was this crazy young entrepreneur who everybody thought was going to crash and burn. And nobody, least of all me, thought that I would be at this position now today, where I have an opportunity to contribute to the future and the present of technology in India. So I say, you gave me 2 minutes to describe this. I would say that this has been a tremendous journey for India. I say again to people that this is just the starting point of where India is going to be in the next decade, the decade that the Honorable Prime Minister has described as the India's decade. So, as that famous saying goes, "Abhi baki picture baki hai." Ye to trailer hi hai. This is just a trailer, and the whole new movie, 2 hours, 30 minutes, or 3 hours of blockbuster drama is still to unfold.
So that, ladies and gentlemen, is this incredible story of 30 years. You sort of put it together in 2 minutes. But apart from that, the Honorable Minister has this deep interest in spaces as a parliamentarian that we saw, supporting the armed forces professionals, fighting for transparency, for internet, for privacy, one of the biggest advocates for privacy. I know that he and his lawyers have gone to court several times to protect rights of citizens. When I was in the sector at the time, the Honorable Minister was leading the charge. He fought both with the government and against the government to protect and defend and strengthen India's first regulator, which is the TRAI. So nobody has made a more seminal contribution to independent regulators. And this is not just words. He filed cases in court, sort of stood by to make sure that there was transparency in decision making, that independent regulators were installed. So taking from that whole belief that you have in policy making. The question that I had for you was that there is a lot of conversation today, and there's news around the new legislations that are being discussed on the data governance side. I'll first ask you a question around how do you see this whole discussion of data and which aspects of it do you think the government should get into? Because we have on one extreme the issue of data being the new oil, on the other side people saying, do this the way that internationally it's done. So where do you see that before I talk about specific actions that might be planned?
Yeah, so thank you, Virat, for asking that. But look, our approach is very commonsensical. I mean, every conversation around data and the digital economy tends to range from from one end of the spectrum to the other, to the very obtuse, to the extremely purist in a sense. And our approach is very focused on what we believe is the direction of our country in terms of innovation, expanding the innovation ecosystem. We believe that the internet and technology are going to be continuing to be big enablers of the growth and expansion of our economy. The $1 trillion digital economy target that the Honorable Prime Minister has set which will amount for almost 25% of the total GDP by 25-26. So that is our starting point. And of course, that privacy has been recognized as a fundamental right by the Supreme Court under Article 21. That is the other boundary condition. And the third, in a sense, starting point is the fact that the current legislation, the IT Act, was enacted in 2000 and is really a 22-year-old act that is trying to regulate internet where minutes and seconds and hours constitute a big enough time period. So we believe that our approach is a comprehensive approach. We will enact a new legislative framework that addresses the digital space, that acts as a catalyst for the digital economy, that will enable more and more innovation, that will encourage more and more startups, and at the same time have clearly laid down boundary conditions which will protect the citizens of India and the users of India in terms of openness, in terms of safety and trust, in terms of accountability. So that will be the broad framework. On the data side and the digital data protection side, we as you know, we withdrew the previous legislation. We will approach Parliament with a comprehensive framework, like I said, of these multiple laws, including a digital data protection law, which will address the rights of the data principal, the obligations of the data fiduciaries, which are the companies that deal in the data economy, and allow for the adjudication of the data breaches in a very smooth, efficient manner, very transparent manner. So that is our approach. And of course, there's a third piece to it, which is the National Data Governance Framework and Policy, which addresses the non-personalized data, the anonymized data, and the AI ecosystem in the India Datasets program. So you will see in a very quick succession or almost together over the next 3 to 4 months, these new rules, laws, and regulations being rolled out. And it will be, as our Prime Minister repeatedly reminds us, it will be subject to intense public consultation, stakeholder consultation. All of the country will be allowed to involved and invited to involve themselves in this conversation about a framework that will clearly make India succeed in this India's decade or not. And clearly, I'm invested in the narrative that we should succeed.
So that, Honorable Minister, is a very interesting view, because in the past, as you know, consultation has usually been done by regulators, and the governments tend to do a little less consultation.
Right.
The consultation that they do usually is at the parliamentary committees, which is obviously consultation, but it's limited to the people who are invited to depose in front of the parliamentary committee. Now, we have 3 legislation with the TRAI Act, the Indian Telegraph Act, and the IT Act 2000. And you're now talking about 3 more. We're talking about the new Data Protection Privacy Bill in some format, the new Digital India Act, and also the draft telecom bill that's being spoken about.
Right.
So if you could sort of lend some light on how these will coexist with the existing legislations. And second part is, what would be the consultation process? Like, how would we do it in the TRAI fashion, which is put it out, get inputs online, or hold open houses, and then sort of put out people's rejoinders? Because you have really fought for that process, so I know that you will want to follow it. Just, it'll help everybody understand.
No, so these laws, these new laws, in a sense, supersede existing legislation.
Okay.
So the Digital India Act will clearly, it is intended to supersede and replace the IT Act. There's no question of both of them continuing. So in a lot of ways, if I didn't make myself clear, I want to do this again, which is that this new set of laws and rules are going to be the enabling laws and rules and guidelines for the coming decade, period. So if there are any contradictions with existing laws and the legacy laws, we will get those laws amended. If there are, and clearly some laws will be repealed, like the IT Act. In terms of public consultation, it is an article of faith for our government. It is a mandate in terms of our method of governance and policy making. And this is, the Prime Minister has repeatedly stressed on this. And we have, as a ministry, done this repeatedly in the recent times in the cybersecurity directions or in the new IT rules that we are in the next few days going to launch. Conducted deep, intensive consultations that have lasted months. So it's not about something that happens overnight. It is not something that is cosmetic and for optics. It is really a belief that we want to build good legislation, good rules, and a good framework that is win-win for the citizen and the startup and the industry ecosystem. And so we believe that multiple minds around the policy basically ends up with giving you a better policy. So we don't approach this with any preconceived directional cues in our mind, as in this is what we want the law to be or this is what we want the policy to be. The Government of India's approach is that we put out these boundary conditions and architectural principles, create a draft rule or a draft law, and then we put it out there on the website and conduct very deep, well-managed consultations that are documented, recorded, and each of those ideas are thought through, each of the inputs are looked at, and therefore the process takes 1 month, 2 months. In the case of the new rules, we started the process of consultation, I believe, in April, and we are now in May, June, July, August, September. So 4 months on, and it will be released now because we had a significant amount of input and a significant amount of questions and queries and clarifications. And for everything, we also issued FAQs so that the intent of the law, the intent of the bill, the intent of the rules, the intent of the directions is well understood by all of the stakeholders in the ecosystem.
Thank you. There's just so much going on in the legislation in such a short space of time. As you can imagine, our delegates here are deeply interested in engaging that process. USIBC itself will engage. They have engaged in the past. I'm sure they will be sort of front and center to provide inputs in all of those. So sure. Thank you for that opportunity. I'll now transition across to the sort of second piece of our discussion, which sort of this session is about a journey from data governance to advanced manufacturing. It's been said that in terms of manufacturing, while we did exceedingly well on the services side, India came slightly late to the manufacturing party, as it were. And that has many implications on jobs in terms of self-sufficiency. And then took the Honorable Prime Minister a couple of years to kind of get around this whole problem and then started fixing it and used different strategies first, to get the products going and then go deeper, and then now the whole semiconductor policy, etc. So given that, while we're talking about smart manufacturing here, advanced manufacturing here, but if I could just get your view on that piece, starting with the nuts and bolts and where you think we're going to head with that, including the various schemes and policies that the government has launched.
So I will speak to manufacturing in the digital space, the technology space.
Right, that's fine.
I won't talk about the other aspects of manufacturing, as important as those are. I am not as well equipped to
and the PLI has about 4 schemes that are in the digital space, so we'll stick to that.
I think here is the context in which we should look at Indian manufacturing and how far we have traveled. For several years before 2014, there was almost a neglect, if you want to call it that, I can't think of a word for it, but the manufacturing sector, the electronics manufacturing sector was given a pass, a go-by. And you are wrong in saying that India came late to the manufacturing party, because we had a significant manufacturing sector.
That is true.
All the way leading to the 90s and early 2000. It is post-2004 that this sort of a laissez-faire, dependence on imports, and I use this phrase, and this is not a political audience, but I'll use that anyway, a reckless, opening up of imports and FTAs without really looking at what our core capabilities and capacities should be as a nation, left our manufacturing sectors completely destroyed. It is from 2014 onwards that we have slowly rebuilt and gained confidence that it is something that we can be good at as a nation. And in a lot of ways, that effort, then catalyzed by the PLI schemes, that has taken us to a critical mass in at least 1 or 2 sectors and segments, is positioning us very well in the post-COVID landscape of significant changes in the supply chains around the world. So I think our ambitions for electronics manufacturing we've made public. We believe we want to be at $300 billion of manufacturing by 25-26. We are currently at about $75 billion. We were at about 12, 14, $20 billion in 2014. We are at 75 billion today, and we want to touch $300 billion. And most importantly, from a point of view of positioning ourselves as a player on a significant trusted partner in the global value chains, we want our exports to go from the current $12, $15 billion number to about $120 billion. There's a significant jump that we want to make there and establish our presence in this very changing global GVCs for electronics. So manufacturing, very, very important component of the $1 trillion digital economy overall pie. We expect that to be, like I said, $300 billion of manufacturing by 25-26, and significantly growing substantially beyond that. The underlying theme there is, while we have gained some prominence and dominance in the mobile phone category, we want to broaden and deepen the electronics ecosystem. So there's a focus on components, there's a focus on other value-added areas of electronics, including broadening the category of products and platforms that we think India can be a trusted partner in these changing times, in the changing GVCs. So that's the ambition, and I think that ambition is a very realistic ambition for us in the near term.
Thank you. You're right, I stand corrected. Actually, in the 90s, the first FDI that opened up was the Lucents and the Fujitsus and the Siemens and the Ericssons, who built up a capacity to pull switches in India for the networks. And then we went all the way with Nokia, became a company that was building amazing number of phones and volumes and exporting to the world. So I do stand corrected, you're right. And then it kind of all crashed around between 2000, I'd say 11 to 14, and then sort of starting up again. So thank you for pointing that out. Taking cue from what you just said, I'm going to turn to Nivritti, as somebody who leads Intel and is the vice president of the Intel Foundry and been deeply interested by the way, for those of you who don't know, she's 29 years at Intel, so a lifer, and of which since 2005 she's been in India doing incredible work in many different roles. So we're very proud to have her here. Your view of where we are headed, because now we are at a stage where companies such as Intel and other companies that are in the semiconductor space have a real role to play. And there is also, I would say, sufficient policy and schemes in place that will help build the volumes that is required for companies to succeed and become self-sufficient in supply. So how do you see this from where we are 5 years ago to now where we are and where we are headed? Just your perspective.
Sure. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So let me start with a little bit of context. Minister Sir just said, we are working towards a $1 trillion economy by 2026. And if you look at how much is the digital economy today, it's 200 billion. So we have to grow by 5x. I also want to say that if you look at the trade the bilateral between India and US, it's also 200 billion. And the goal that, I saw USIBC has set is 500 billion. My ask is it's small. We have to double because we can only grow together. India and US have been, the largest democracy with similar vision, global good for humanity. I think our goals need to be bigger. The other thing I want to say is, like Minister Sir said, manufacturing is really very important. I'm very excited to say that both Virat and Minister Sir have been talking about, cell phones and mobile phones. Last year, we manufactured 300 million. And we were the second largest after China. Of course, China built 1.5 billion, so we have ways to grow and ways to go. But that was a big success. And the second thing I want to say is we have been manufacturing cars also to a large extent, not just for the India needs, but for needs of countries like Europe and South Korea as well. So I'm very excited that India is on the path where we can dream and work towards a $1 trillion economy. I also want to say that the last few years, semiconductors have become suddenly very exciting. Even Hertz rental car, salesperson was telling me, ma'am, the car rental is so much more expensive because we sold the cars during the downtimes and now we don't have new cars to buy. So, the rental cars are so expensive. So clearly, semiconductor is going to be a very, very critical building block for anything we do digital. We were consuming, in 2018, we were consuming 1 GB data per month with our phones. 4 years later, we are now consuming 15 GB per month. And 4 years from now, the prediction is 50 GB. So what we are saying is the need for storage of data, the need for cloud, the need for data centers is going to be at least 4x, just based on the data prediction. To build your own servers, to build your capability to drive your own cloud, for all of the data protection that we're talking about, I think semiconductor will play a huge role. Whether it is building servers for clouds, or whether it is your equipments, whether it is phone, or whether it is your car, there's going to be tremendous amount of semiconductor everywhere. I believe we are on the right path. I will speak for myself, and I'm going to urge for all of you to look at. Diversification of supply chain is very important. We cannot have dependence on one single country. So what we as Intel did is we moved a lot of building blocks. Within a laptop, within a desktop, there are lots of building blocks. In cars, there are building blocks like ECUs, engine control units. So similar building block inside a laptop desktop is a Wi-Fi module. And 10% of Intel's Wi-Fi modules we moved to be manufactured in India. I think that's the journey that we as Intel have begun. And I really believe that we have to continue doing so. The other thing I want to say is India is very rich in people. India is very rich in passionate people, and therefore each passionate person is a data factory generating a lot of data. Over the last couple of years, EU has created what they call as Federated and Secure Data Sharing Consortium and Platform called Gaia X and Katina X across all the countries in Europe. What that does is enables data sharing, very secure data sharing. And we all know about the data protection requirement, the GDPR in Europe. I honestly believe between India and US, the two largest democracies with similar goals, have to have like a hyperloop that shares data. Very protected, very secure, kind of like a Katina and kind of like a Gaia. If India has to dream about 1 trillion, we have to look at multiple things. Manufacturing being one, like Minister said, 75 million has to grow to 200 billion. To enable that, we have to create more value, more partnership. We have to have many ships rising together. So data sharing is important. The last thing I want to say is COVID has taught us that we can work from anywhere. And I really believe, honestly, that our resources, our very talented resources, should look at what the global needs are and generate skilled people that meet the needs of the global requirement, specifically US, India, and the other nations who we want to work with. I really believe software as a service is very critical. I really believe manufacturing and getting our people ready to be able to build semiconductors, to have people who are qualified to work in a fab. Those are the kind of skills that are important. Software as a service. India is already a nation known to be software. Can we have our software people trained on cloud and edge and provide the largest resource pool for software as a service? And I can tell you, finish with the last thing. There was a time India was looked upon, in a blink, and India conversation was gone in many countries that I have participated, including US and Europe. I'll tell you in the discussions that happen in US in forums I participate, that if you overlook India, India will overlook you. How? And the examples, and many times I have given this example. When India was looking at getting credit cards, and there were many companies, I don't want to name any, but many companies who were skeptical about credit cards. What India decided, okay, we will go from cash-driven economy to digital economy and digital wallets. So if India's potential, India's capabilities, contributions are looked away, India will move on. So that's the kind of understanding and belief people have about India, and the opportunity is ours. So what can each one of us do to provide that value for the world, from India, and for India as well?
Thank you. Thank you, Nirmati. Dr. Shivarma, if I could come to you to continue that thread of discussion on advanced manufacturing. You've spent a lifetime in semiconductors, 3D memory architecture, process technology equipment. If I might add, 13 years at Intel. There is a lot of Intel on the stage today. All my very distinguished guests, including the minister, have spent some time at Intel. So there's this sort of strong bond. If I could turn to you, sir, and ask you your views on, given this tremendous push that we are seeing, especially since 2016-17, after the government got its sort of, the new government, Mr. Modi got his vision clear on, they took about 2 years to get, because we were in a pretty bad shape, as you can imagine. And then we sort of climbed from there. And now the Honorable Minister's comment about deepening the piece, which is there's a broadening piece and the deepening piece. And this is exactly where companies such as yours and professionals such as yours have a very strong input and contribution. So if I could ask your view of that and how you see that going forward.
So, thank you. Let me start with the sense of optimism that I have seen here both yesterday in the evening when the ministers were talking and today as the Honorable Minister was talking about today. Overall, the sense of optimism is unmistakable. Clearly this march that India is the 5th largest economy today is going to be on this progression to be the 4th and the 3rd, and we are going to become this multi-10 trillion dollar economy in the short form. There is an inevitability to it. We could not have said that 10 years ago. Clearly, there is the drive, the willingness, the will, and the commitment to get to that level. Given that this train is going to go there, what is it that we as private sector can do to accelerate it and get on board? I represent Western Digital. We store 40% of the world's data. Let me repeat that. 40% of the world's data is stored in a Western Digital device. If you take your picture today and posted it on Instagram, your better profile is on Western Digital. Given that data, as we say, is the new oil, data is the lifeblood of the economy, etc., data storage, as Nirmati was talking about, becomes paramount. Every morning when I get in India, I get good morning notes with some beautiful pictures there. And that gets forwarded, that gets stored, that gets repeated. In a rudimentary fashion, you can see the multiplication of data. We now are in what we call a zettabyte era. A zettabyte is 10 to the 21 bytes. Unbelievable numbers. And we need to store them, process them, network them, get value out of them, get knowledge out of them, and get wisdom out of them. That's our job. That's what private industry is trying to assist to make this happen. In storing and processing that level of 40% of the world's data, of course, let me go to a narrow depth as you are talking about. Semiconductors form an integral basis of this. Memory and data storage are about 30% of the semiconductor revenue today, the fastest growing segment. even though Nivriti and all of Intel, my former colleagues, will talk in terms of nanometers and 2 nanometer, 3 nanometer. The faster growth is not there. It is in flash and DRAM memories. And there the manufacturing volumes are very, very high. The entire supply chain, whether you start from design all the way into manufacturing the wafers to assemble them, test them, put them into systems, and put them in the data center, make sure that the data then gets analyzed. And there is a lot of growth that's happening in India. The first strength that India has, that we tend to take for granted, is our human potential. We have a large operation in Bangalore. The one metric that I use when we hire young graduates from college who come and join us, we hire a lot of them from every engineering college around here, is time to first patent. That's the metric that we closely watch. In India, with that much firepower, we want to make sure intellectual property is created. Intellectual property to think broadly, take our visions wider, making sure we can support this growth that we are looking for. And we have plenty of that. And every year I see that the time from the time that a new college graduate joins to the time he files a patent is growing shorter and shorter, much to my satisfaction. Given that, if you had told me 6, 7 years ago, come and set up a factory in India, I would have said, yeah, thank you, good idea. Today, on the other hand, the question is, why am I not here already? Which part of the manufacturing chain should I start first? How quickly can I expand? The government is doing its part. The PLI schemes, those are all there. The government is interacting. The government is taking the effort to do the right things. But my colleagues here in the audience, the private sector, has a very, very large role to play. We want the government to be an enabler, but I don't want to create a dependency. In the end, it is the markets that we serve, which is where I started. If we end up being this multi-10 trillion economy and the consumption is in India, I cannot afford to not have the diversity of manufacturing in India. So, to finish the story from the beginning, the inevitability is here. It's only which of us will be here, which of us will get on this train, which of us will enable this train to accelerate, which of us will benefit the most out of this transformation. Data is going to drive it. Anyone participating in the data economy better get on this train and manufacturing fast.
Thank you. We've got about 5 minutes left, so Honorable Minister. I'm going to, since this is primarily a US audience, sort of CXOs and policy heads and technology heads of US companies, and also diplomats, also Indian companies who are sort of deeply interested in this India-US space. And that's also the construct of USIBC and the work the outstanding work they do to support this bilateral relationship in many ways, most importantly, trade. If I could ask you, in this journey that you've outlined, especially on the data governance space, a little bit on the manufacturing, if you could also focus, what could be the role, including the point that Nivriti made about we need an engagement with US government, US businesses in arrangement so that these two countries that are sort of termed as the biggest democracy, the oldest democracy, defining relationship of the 21st. There are quotes and quotes from presidents and prime ministers. What is it that your message would be? What is it we should be doing as industry, and what is your sort of expectation, and how best can we engage on what issues?
Yeah, so I'm going to take up from where both Shiva and Nivriti made their points. I think one of the important realizations is that we are now in an era of significant opportunity. And we have danced around this issue for several years, and we are a democracy, you are a democracy. All of that has happened. But we are at a point today where the digital opportunity is just $1 trillion plus opportunity. It's a real opportunity. And there are two other moving parts here that I want everybody to focus on. That the future of technology, in my opinion, there's going to be considerable changes. There are lots of other innovation and disruptions down the road as we go down this road of this huge opportunity. There is a need for a framework of cooperation and collaboration between nations, such as the US and India, in shaping the contours of direction of the vector of this future direction. And left unsaid is, if we don't do it, somebody else will, and that somebody else is not somebody who we want to decide the future of technology. So that is number one. Number two is, I think, in terms of data and the future of the internet and all of these things that we have discussed, including challenges on how to deal with big tech, so the regulatory and policy framework to regulate technologies or the internet, again, I believe there are silos that have developed over the last 4 or 5 years, and it's time for countries like the US and India to come up, sit down, figure out a framework, whether it is the G20, whether it is something else, whether it's a Quad, and actually start putting pen to paper and saying, this is what we want to be the architecture or the future of the regulation or the regulatory framework or the guidelines or whatever you want to call it, about the future of the internet. Because otherwise, we will end up with, your crypto is not my crypto. I'm giving you an example, because my crypto is not your crypto, and spending a lot of meaningless time and energy on regulating locally, but having the phenomenon become what we all know. Technology is going to be global, and the footprint of that is very, very difficult to isolate down to specific geography. So I think, look, this is a huge opportunity. I've spent several years in the space and have a finely developed sense of intuition about this, then having meetings with very, very learned and wise people from the industry validate that we are on the cusp of something really big. And it's for partnerships to develop and evolve to make those opportunities real and to benefit our citizens, benefit our startups on both sides of this equation of India and the US.
Thank you. I'll take a short comment from both of you. Niriti first, and then you on the India-US piece, then try and bring this to a close. Twitter comment.
I actually already said that I think India and US need to amp up more, because if we continue at the pace, then we will neither of us will be growing to the goals that we've set for ourselves. Today, the trade is 200 billion. And the contribution from technology is also 200 billion. And if we want to look at 1 trillion economy, I feel that the India-US trade has to target 1 trillion rather than 500 billion, and which means that each of the country has to contribute to each of the country's growth. And we can do that with leveraging each other's strength. And like Virat said, Siva said, people is our strength. I really look at people, our strength, software, our strength, and data as our strength. And then the last thing, which is most important ingredient, our passion. We are not complacent. Many of the countries who have been enjoying, greater than $10,000 GDP per capita can get complacent. We are not. And Siva said that, he felt the energy. I feel it day in, day out in Intel. So all of that is our strength, and we have to leverage that as a partner.
If you visited Meiti, that's for sure. Nobody's complacent there, that's for sure. Please have a glass of water. Dr. Shivaram. Please.
So there is a famous quote from the hockey player Wayne Gretzky. You want to skate to where the puck will be, not where the puck was. Which is the most important point today. There have been past histories, past behaviors, that does not matter. We know where we need to be. We need to all be skating towards that. As the minister said, there are going to be technology disruptions. Today's technologies will be replaced by better, newer, faster that are going to be coming in front of us. Startups are going to be out there disrupting everybody's business model all the time. Our job is to be nimble, believe in the inevitability of the growth, make the investments, commit, and get over here quickly.
Thank you. There you have it, ladies and gentlemen. The leadership of USIBC is here. The message is clear, looking for a stronger, deeper relationship, engagement, cooperation amongst the two countries. You've heard about the journey. You've heard how the three panelists have laid out the future, their trust and belief, and the energy that is in this room, as was said, was palpable last evening and continues to be. If you've visited Métis, I can promise you it is full of action 24/7. They're on this. And thank you, Mr. Minister. Thank you, my very distinguished panelists. A round of applause for my panelists here.
Thank you very much. May I please invite Ambassador Keshup on stage? And I would like to request Ambassador Keshup, our panelists, Nivruti Rai, Shiva Shivram, and the moderator Virat Bhatia to please present a green certificate to the Honorable Minister, Shri Rajiv Chandrasekhar. This is an initiative of the India Idea Summit, and on behalf of the Minister, a cluster of 5 trees are going to be planted for our environment. I request Ambassador Keshup and the panelists to present the certificate. Can you please gather for a group photograph? Thank you very much, ma'am and gentlemen, for that lovely session.
All right, friends, we're going to break for lunch in a couple minutes, but first, I want everybody to stick around for a greeting from a dear friend of mine, a fellow who was my boss, Kurt Campbell. And Kurt Campbell is the coordinator for Indo-Pacific affairs at the White House. So we're going to play this video. Kurt was my boss when I was the APEC envoy, and he's a great guy. He helped forge the concept of the Indo-Pacific, and he's been a great and active proponent of the Quad as well. And he works at the right hand of President Biden as an advisor on all things related to policy toward India. So it is really nice that the National Security Council, Kurt Campbell, the Assistant to the President for National Security and the Indo-Pacific, has given us a video greeting. We'll play that now. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. It's Kurt Campbell from Washington, D.C. Thank you, Atul, for the invitation. I am so pleased that I've been invited to the U.S.-India Business Council and that it can gather together again in person. And I wish I could be with you there at the Taj Palace in New Delhi. But even from 7,000 miles away, I'm honored to be with you virtually to commemorate 75 years of diplomatic relations between the United States and India, and to recognize the critical role that the U.S.-India Business Council has played in strengthening ties between our two great countries. For the United States, our relationship with India, a partnership between the world's oldest democracy and its largest, is among the most vital and important relationships that we have in the world. That is why the Biden-Harris administration has made partnership with India a central priority. In March 2021, in his first multilateral engagement as president, President Biden hosted virtually the first ever summit of the Quad, the United States, India, Australia, and Japan, representing the future of the Indo-Pacific. Since then, the Quad has met twice at the leader level in person in Washington and then in Tokyo, and has become a premier regional grouping Last September, President Biden was honored to host Prime Minister Modi at the White House, and in May, India made the decision to join the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, and our leaders launched an innovative United States-India initiative on critical and emerging technologies thereafter. Much of our partnership strength comes from the strong ties between our people and our businesses. And for the last 47 years, the U.S.-India Business Council has been a leader in forging and maintaining those ties. The friendship you've built between our countries transcend boardrooms. So many of us, and our Indian friends most of all, remember the devastation that COVID wrought in India last year. It was the U.S.-India Business Council that sprang to action to mobilize emergency aid to India. It was a remarkable show of solidarity and strength with practical, life-saving results. It complemented the $100 million in urgent relief that the United States government delivered in those dark days in April 2021, just as India sent assistance to the United States when our hospitals were strained to capacity early in the pandemic. My hope is that 75 years from now, when this forum meets, its members will look back on this anniversary as only the beginning of a new era of ambition and closeness in the U.S.-Indian partnership. I look forward to seeing you in person next time. Thank you very much.